The title "Post-Fire Reforestation in the Vesuvius National Park" immediately recalls one of the most emblematic challenges of Mediterranean forest management. After the catastrophic fires of 2017, Vesuvius became not only a site of ecological devastation, but also a living laboratory of resilience and restoration. This presentation explores the comprehensive set of strategies adopted to safeguard the forest ecosystem, from naturalistic engineering works, designed to stabilize fragile pyroclastic soils, to scientifically guided reforestation techniques that combine targeted planting with the enhancement of natural regeneration. At the core of these actions lies the principle that reforestation is not a simple replacement of trees, but a multidisciplinary ecological restoration process, integrating soil protection, biodiversity conservation, and climate adaptation. Particular emphasis is given to the role of the Carabinieri forestali, whose interventions demonstrated how rapid, science-based actions can prevent erosion, preserve fertility, and allow spontaneous renewal to flourish. The Vesuvius case thus represents a model of best practice, where academic research, institutional capacity, and ecological processes converge to transform post-fire devastation into an opportunity for innovation and long-term resilience. Post-fire reforestation in Mediterranean ecosystems must be understood as a process of ecological restoration oriented towards resilience, rather than a simple replacement of lost trees. Wildfires, increasingly aggravated by prolonged droughts and human pressure, deeply alter ecosystem functionality, disrupting soil structure, hydrological cycles, and biodiversity patterns. The case of Mount Vesuvius after the 2017 wildfires provides a significant example. Here, the fragile volcanic soils, highly vulnerable to erosion and runoff, risked irreversible degradation. The intervention of the Carabinieri forestali demonstrated the importance of scientifically guided strategies, combining soil bioengineering measures, such as check dams, fascines, and live crib walls, with a careful support of natural regeneration dynamics. Rather than relying exclusively on large-scale planting, the approach focused on stabilizing slopes and enabling spontaneous renewal, particularly of fire-resilient Mediterranean species such as holm oak and downy oak. This methodology reflects a paradigm shift, reforestation as a science-based, site-specific strategy that enhances resilience, supports natural succession, and restores ecosystem services, while reducing the risk of future ecological collapse. Large-scale wildfires, especially those exceeding 1,000 hectares, represent one of the most critical threats to Mediterranean ecosystems. Beyond the immediate destruction of vegetation, they compromise soil fertility, biodiversity, and hydrogeological stability, creating long-term vulnerabilities that are difficult to reverse. The case of Vesuvius is particularly emblematic. Its pyroclastic soils, inherently fragile and loosely structured, are highly prone to erosion and surface runoff once tree cover is lost. After the 2017 fires, it became evident how quickly the absence of vegetation could accelerate processes of land degradation and ecosystem collapse. Without immediate stabilization, rainfall events could have washed away fertile layers, undermining not only ecological recovery but also human safety in the surrounding areas. This context highlights the need for naturalistic engineering measures, such as slope stabilization, controlled drainage, and vegetative barriers, to prevent irreversible soil loss. On Vesuvius, these interventions have proven decisive in buying time for natural regeneration processes, ensuring that the ecosystem could gradually restore its structure and functionality. Post-fire reforestation in Mediterranean ecosystems must be guided by objectives that go far beyond the simple recovery of vegetation cover. The first priority is hydrogeological stabilization, particularly in fragile territories such as Vesuvius, where pyroclastic soils are extremely erodible. Through naturalistic engineering techniques, such as fascinate barriers, live wooden piles, and bioengineering lattices, it becomes possible to reduce runoff, limit soil loss, and re-establish the stability of slopes. Equally crucial is the creation of microenvironments that facilitate the processes of spontaneous natural regeneration. This approach leverages the resilience of native ecosystems by providing ecological niches where seeds from the residual seed bank or dispersed by wind and fauna can germinate and establish. Finally, a selective increase in biodiversity is necessary where natural colonization proves insufficient. The mesa demora of native species, carefully chosen for their ecological compatibility and resilience to Mediterranean fire regimes, allows the restoration of structural and functional complexity. This ensures not only the consolidation of soils but also the reactivation of ecological processes such as carbon sequestration, nutrient cycling, and the creation of habitats for fauna. In synthesis, these objectives form an integrated framework in which engineering stabilization, ecological succession, and biodiversity enhancement operate synergistically, ensuring long-term resilience of post-fire landscapes. A rigorous scientific approach is indispensable for the success of post-fire reforestation. Decisions cannot be based on empirical practices alone but must rely on a solid foundation of quantitative indicators. First, pedological analysis allows the assessment of soil fertility, texture, organic matter, and hydrophobicity levels, which are often deeply altered by fire. This knowledge is essential to calibrate interventions for soil stabilization and to determine whether conditions allow for spontaneous regeneration or require assisted recovery. Second, the application of geomorphological models enables the prediction of erosive dynamics and the identification of sectors most vulnerable to runoff and landslides. These models help in positioning naturalistic engineering works such as fascinate barriers and check dams, optimizing their effectiveness. Third, satellite monitoring provides continuous, large-scale data on vegetation cover, soil moisture, and regrowth dynamics. Tools like sentinel imagery, combined with UAV-based photogrammetry, allow the evaluation of post-intervention effectiveness with high spatial and temporal resolution. On Vesuvius, these instruments were integrated through geomatic surveys and an adaptive management framework, meaning that interventions were continuously refined based on monitoring feedback. This approach not only contained soil loss but also supported the processes of secondary succession, allowing natural regeneration to complement and in some cases replace artificial planting. The Mediterranean ecosystem is characterized by a unique combination of climatic stressors and ecological fragility. Prolonged summer droughts create chronic water stress, which weakens vegetation and increases its vulnerability to ignition. At the same time, the dense Mediterranean scrub, Machia, is composed of highly flammable species rich in resins and essential oils, such as Pistacia lentiscus and Erica arborea, which act as natural accelerants during wildfire events. The Vesuvius area represents an exceptional natural laboratory for studying these dynamics. Its pyroclastic soils are inherently fragile, prone to erosion and rapid degradation when vegetation cover is lost. Combined with steep slopes and high anthropogenic pressure, including tourism, urban expansion, and agricultural mosaics, these conditions amplify both the frequency and the severity of wildfires. Fires on Vesuvius have repeatedly reshaped entire ecosystems, replacing mature forests with shrublands or degraded grasslands, and in many cases creating landscapes locked in a cycle of recurrent fire and ecological impoverishment. This makes soil protection not just an ecological goal but a priority prerequisite for any reforestation or restoration strategy. From a scientific perspective, interventions in Mediterranean contexts must always account for the dual vulnerability, ecological, due to high combustibility and slow forest recovery, and geomorphological, due to the risk of erosion and loss of fertility. On Vesuvius, these lessons underline how reforestation cannot be reduced to tree planting, but must integrate naturalistic engineering, water management, and the promotion of resilient native communities. The fire dynamics on Vesuvius provide a clear example of how topography, geology, and climate interact to amplify wildfire behavior. The presence of pyroclastic soils, derived from ancient volcanic eruptions, creates a friable and aerated substrate that accelerates the spread of surface fires. When combined with strong hot winds, these conditions facilitated the rapid propagation of flames, generating violent and expansive fire fronts. A key feature of these events was the prevalence of incomplete combustion. Unlike fast, intense crown fires that may consume biomass more fully, the Vesuvius fires left behind large amounts of unburned or partially combusted material. This process not only released significant quantities of pollutants, including carbon monoxide, hydrocarbons, and fine particulate matter, but also left unstable organic residues on the soil surface, which are easily mobilized by rainwater. The ecological consequences are twofold. On one hand, the atmospheric burden of pollutants contributes to local air quality deterioration and even to broader climate-forcing mechanisms. On the other, the destabilized soil structure accelerates erosion and runoff in the immediate post-fire period. Without rapid stabilization measures, such as fascinate barriers, mulching, or selective planting, valuable topsoil can be lost within the first seasonal rains, undermining any future restoration. Therefore, the Vesuvius case highlights the necessity of timely, science-driven interventions. Containing erosion in the critical window following fire suppression is essential to preserve soil fertility, safeguard downstream communities from hydrogeological risk, and create the ecological preconditions for spontaneous regeneration and targeted reforestation. The Vesuvius ecosystem exemplifies the fragility of Mediterranean volcanic landscapes. The mountain slopes, composed of ancient pyroclastic deposits, are characterized by a friable and porous substrate. While this soil supports a unique vegetation mosaic under stable conditions, it becomes extremely vulnerable to post-fire leaching and erosion. After the 2017 fires, the absence of tree cover and root systems drastically reduced soil cohesion, exposing the slopes to rapid degradation under even moderate rainfall. In such a context, the risk was not only the loss of fertile topsoil but the onset of irreversible desertification processes on the volcanic cone. Once the thin fertile layer is washed away, the underlying pyroclastic matrix provides very limited capacity for natural recovery, severely constraining both spontaneous regeneration and artificial reforestation. The intervention of the Carabinieri forestali with naturalistic engineering works, bridles, fascinate barriers, and wooden check dams, proved decisive. These measures acted as hydraulic brakes, slowing runoff, trapping sediment, and preserving the soil capital essential for ecosystem recovery. By protecting the substrate, they indirectly safeguarded the potential for biodiversity renewal. Indeed, spontaneous regeneration of keystone Mediterranean species, such as Quercus ilex and Arbutus unido, was observed in stabilized areas, whereas unstabilized slopes showed poor recolonization. This case study underlines that soil conservation is the foundation of biodiversity conservation. In fire-prone Mediterranean systems, the effectiveness of restoration strategies depends first and foremost on retaining soil fertility. Without the hydrogeological buffer provided by naturalistic engineering, even the most ambitious reforestation programs would fail to restore ecosystem functionality on fragile volcanic terrains like Vesuvius. The Vesuvius ecosystem exemplifies the fragility of Mediterranean volcanic landscapes. The mountain slopes, composed of ancient pyroclastic deposits, are characterized by a friable and porous substrate. While this soil supports a unique vegetation mosaic under stable conditions, it becomes extremely vulnerable to post-fire leaching and erosion. After the 2017 fires, the absence of tree cover and root systems drastically reduced soil cohesion, exposing the slopes to rapid degradation under even moderate rainfall. In such a context, the risk was not only the loss of fertile topsoil but the onset of irreversible desertification processes on the volcanic cone. Once the thin fertile layer is washed away, the underlying pyroclastic matrix provides very limited capacity for natural recovery, severely constraining both spontaneous regeneration and artificial reforestation. The intervention of the Carabinieri forestali with naturalistic engineering works, bridles, fascinate barriers, and wooden check dams, proved decisive. These measures acted as hydraulic brakes, slowing runoff, trapping sediment, and preserving the soil capital essential for ecosystem recovery. By protecting the substrate, they indirectly safeguarded the potential for biodiversity renewal. Indeed, spontaneous regeneration of keystone Mediterranean species, such as Quercus ilex and Arbutus unido, was observed in stabilized areas, whereas unstabilized slopes showed poor recolonization. This case study underlines that soil conservation is the foundation of biodiversity conservation. In fire-prone Mediterranean systems, the effectiveness of restoration strategies depends first and foremost on retaining soil fertility. Without the hydrogeological buffer provided by naturalistic engineering, even the most ambitious reforestation programs would fail to restore ecosystem functionality on fragile volcanic terrains like Vesuvius. The selection of species represents one of the most critical phases in post-fire reforestation, as it directly influences both the ecological resilience and the long-term stability of the system. On Vesuvius, the Carabinieri forestali adopted a functional and site-specific approach, carefully matching species traits to the unique pedoclimatic conditions of the volcanic slopes. Priority was given to slow-growing, fire-resistant Mediterranean species, well adapted to the recurrent disturbance regime of this ecosystem. Evergreen oak groves, dominated by Quercus ilex and Quercus pubescens, were considered essential structural components. Their deep root systems anchor the friable pyroclastic soils, while their sclerophyllous leaves reduce evapotranspiration and increase drought tolerance. In addition to trees, the strategy emphasized shrubs of the Mediterranean scrub, such as the strawberry tree, Arbutus unido, and Erica arborea. These pioneer species provide rapid ground cover, stabilize loose sediments, and create microhabitats that facilitate the germination of late successional species. Their resprouting ability after fire further ensures continuity in vegetation cover, even under repeated disturbance. Importantly, the diversity of growth forms, from trees to shrubs, creates a multilayered structure that not only consolidates the soil but also improves resistance to future fires by breaking fuel continuity. This plant selection reflects a restorative philosophy. Rather than introducing exotic or fast-growing species, the aim was to reinforce the adaptive capacity of the native Mediterranean vegetation, ensuring long-term ecological functionality and alignment with natural succession dynamics. Direct seeding has been widely recognized as an effective and scalable strategy in post-fire restoration, particularly when dealing with large, severely burned areas where immediate ground cover is necessary to prevent soil degradation. On fragile substrates such as the pyroclastic soils of Vesuvius, seeding was used as a complementary measure to engineering interventions, aiming to establish a rapid vegetative layer that could counteract erosion and hydrological instability. The success of this technique depends on careful species selection. Pioneer herbaceous and shrubby plants, with rapid germination rates and shallow but dense root systems, are ideal candidates. Species such as annual grasses, legumes, and Mediterranean shrubs provide quick soil stabilization, enrich the organic matter, and facilitate successional processes by creating microenvironments where tree seedlings can later establish. However, seeding requires protective measures. Without erosion control, through fascines, mulch layers, or natural barriers, seeds can be washed away before germination. Similarly, faunal predation, particularly by birds and rodents, can significantly reduce seedling density. For this reason, techniques such as hydroseeding, seed coating, or integration with biodegradable mulches are often employed to enhance seed survival and establishment rates. In the context of Vesuvius, direct seeding proved instrumental in accelerating the early stages of ecological succession, providing a green protective mantle within the first post-fire seasons. This approach highlights the principle that restoration is not only about planting trees but about recreating functional conditions for ecosystem regeneration, where soil protection, biodiversity recovery, and natural processes can progress in synergy. The ecological outcome of these measures has been remarkable. Instead of imposing large-scale artificial planting, these interventions favored natural regeneration processes. Residual seed banks and surviving root systems were able to sprout again, ensuring the recovery of native species such as holm oak, Quercus ilex, and Mediterranean shrubs. This approach is fully consistent with the principles of restoration ecology, where the priority is to re-establish ecosystem functionality, soil stability, nutrient cycling, biodiversity recovery, rather than merely replanting trees. From a technical perspective, naturalistic engineering is also advantageous in terms of cost efficiency and resilience. Unlike rigid infrastructures, these living structures evolve with time. The roots of livewood weirs grow and further consolidate the slopes, while fascines decompose and enrich the soil. This synergy between structural stabilization and ecological processes demonstrates that effective post-fire restoration must be site-specific, adaptive, and grounded in natural dynamics. The Vesuvian case is now recognized as an international best practice, proving that bioengineering can successfully combine hydrogeological protection with ecological regeneration, reducing the need for costly artificial planting while accelerating the return of a self-sustaining forest ecosystem. Hydrogeological management after a fire is a decisive factor in safeguarding ecosystem recovery. The absence of vegetation immediately exposes slopes to severe erosion, especially in fragile volcanic contexts such as Vesuvius. The pyroclastic substrate is highly friable, and without rapid intervention, rainfall can trigger surface wash, gullies, and shallow landslides, leading to irreversible soil loss. The strategy adopted by the Carabinieri Forestali illustrates how naturalistic engineering can provide both stability and ecological value. Controlled drainage interventions, channels, and transversal structures such as wooden barriers or live fascines redirect water flow and dissipate its energy, reducing erosive power. Simultaneously, greening techniques accelerate soil cover, enhancing the retention of nutrients and moisture. This integrated approach demonstrates that water management in the first years post-fire is not only a defense against hydrogeological risk but also a catalyst for vegetation regeneration. It transforms a vulnerable, degraded slope into a resilient ecosystem, capable of re-establishing ecological functionality and resisting future disturbances. Post-fire ground dynamics represent one of the most critical aspects of ecosystem recovery, as the soil is the fundamental matrix for vegetation renewal. After intense burning, the upper layers of soil often become hydrophobic due to the volatilization of organic compounds, which condense and coat soil particles, thereby reducing water infiltration. At the same time, large quantities of organic matter are lost, and the edaphic microfauna, nematodes, collembolans, and microorganisms that drive nutrient cycling, is drastically reduced. This biological impoverishment compromises both fertility and the capacity of the system to regenerate spontaneously. If left unmanaged, such processes may lead to accelerated erosion and irreversible land degradation. Scientific evidence shows that targeted interventions, including the application of organic mulches, biochar, and mycorrhizal inocula, can restore soil biological quality by improving water retention, reintroducing microbial symbionts, and stabilizing nutrient cycles. On fragile substrates like those of Vesuvius, these measures are crucial for re-establishing a functional soil plant system and for reducing the risk of desertification. In this sense, soil management is not a secondary step, but the foundation of any successful post-fire reforestation program. Post-intervention monitoring is a fundamental component of any post-fire restoration program, as it ensures that implemented measures are both effective and adaptive over time. The Vesuvius case provides a best practice example of integrated monitoring strategies. Aerial photogrammetry conducted with drones enables the generation of high-resolution orthomosaics and 3D digital surface models, allowing precise quantification of erosion patterns, vegetation cover, and slope stability. In parallel, Sentinel-2 multispectral satellite imagery offers systematic temporal monitoring at regional scale, providing indicators such as the Normalized Difference Vegetation Index, NDVI, and burn severity indices, which are essential for evaluating vegetative recovery. Field inspections conducted by the Carabinieri Forestali complement these technologies, enabling ground truth validation and assessment of ecological indicators such as seedling establishment, species diversity, and soil stabilization. This multi-tiered approach creates a feedback loop between science and practice. Data collected informs whether additional interventions are necessary, such as reinforcing naturalistic engineering works or supporting spontaneous regeneration with targeted plantings. Ultimately, integrated monitoring transforms restoration into a dynamic process, ensuring resilience of the ecosystem and the long-term efficiency of the containment structures against erosion and runoff. Biodiversity assessment is a cornerstone in evaluating the effectiveness of post-fire reforestation programs. Unlike purely quantitative metrics such as survival rates or canopy cover, biodiversity indicators reflect the restoration of ecosystem functionality. Floristic richness, the variety of plant species re-establishing after the fire, serves as a proxy for habitat heterogeneity, which in turn supports a wider range of fauna. The return of key species across trophic levels, from pollinators to seed dispersers and predators, indicates the reactivation of ecological networks that sustain resilience. To move beyond qualitative observations, ecologists employ indices such as the Shannon-Weiner Index or Simpson's Diversity Index, which quantify species diversity and dominance patterns. These metrics allow a standardized comparison across sites and time, ensuring that interventions are not only re-establishing tree cover but also fostering complex interactions that underpin long-term ecosystem stability. On Vesuvius, the monitoring of faunal indicators such as invertebrate communities and avian recolonization has provided tangible evidence that naturalistic engineering and selective planting strategies are effectively supporting ecological resilience. Ultimately, biodiversity assessment transforms reforestation from a forestry operation into an ecological restoration process. Climate change operates as a disturbance multiplier, reshaping fire regimes across the Mediterranean. Rising temperatures, prolonged droughts, and altered wind temperature dynamics are not only increasing the frequency of wildfires, but also their intensity and unpredictability. Reconstituted forests, which are often young, homogeneous, and structurally simplified, are particularly at risk because they lack the ecological buffers of mature, diverse systems. To address this vulnerability, restoration strategies must move beyond conventional reforestation and embrace the principles of resilience and adaptability. This means favoring structural heterogeneity, such as a mosaic of age classes and species compositions, along with functional diversity, ensuring that different ecological roles are represented within the ecosystem. Ecological plasticity, the capacity of species and communities to adjust to new environmental conditions, becomes a critical criterion for species selection and landscape design. At the operational level, predictive risk modeling, integrated with high-resolution satellite monitoring, provides managers with the ability to anticipate hotspots of vulnerability and to plan interventions before thresholds of degradation are crossed. The Vesuvius case exemplifies this approach, where geomatic surveys and satellite tools have been combined to anticipate erosion and biodiversity loss under future climate scenarios. In essence, the challenge is to build forests not only capable of recovering from fire, but also able to persist and adapt under the accelerated pace of climate change. Experience from Mediterranean countries such as Spain, Greece, and Portugal has demonstrated that the most effective post-fire restoration strategies are those that integrate ecological principles with applied naturalistic engineering. In highly vulnerable areas, the stabilization of soils through bioengineering techniques, such as live weirs, fascines, and wooden pilings, has proven essential to mitigate erosion and prevent the rapid loss of fertile substrate. At the same time, the selective planting of native and fire-adapted species has accelerated secondary succession processes, reinforcing natural regeneration rather than replacing it. What makes these interventions particularly robust is their coupling with advanced spatial technologies. GIS-based platforms and remote sensing tools, including Sentinel satellite imagery, have enabled continuous and precise monitoring of landscape recovery, offering managers quantitative data on vegetation dynamics, soil stability, and biodiversity trends. These science-driven practices have not only reduced hydrogeological risk but also enhanced biodiversity and strengthened ecosystem services such as carbon sequestration and hydrological regulation. Their long-term success underscores a crucial lesson: post-fire reforestation cannot rely on silvicultural practices alone but must be grounded in interdisciplinary approaches that combine ecological restoration, engineering, and cutting-edge technological monitoring. This integrated model is directly transferable to the Mediterranean. The application of GIS and remote sensing technologies has become indispensable in the post-fire management of Mediterranean ecosystems, where both the spatial extent and ecological fragility of fire-affected areas demand highly accurate planning. The Sentinel-2 constellation of the Copernicus program provides multispectral imagery at 10 to 20 meter resolution with a revisit time of only a few days, allowing near real-time monitoring of fire scars. Among the most widely used indicators, the normalized burn ratio, NBR, and its derivative, the differenced NBR, DNBR, enable precise assessment of burn severity, providing essential input for identifying zones where natural regeneration is likely to succeed versus areas requiring human intervention. The integration of these satellite data into GIS platforms allows managers to overlay fire severity with soil characteristics, slope stability, and hydrological networks, thus guiding intervention strategies in a spatially explicit way. In parallel, drone-based surveys offer ultra-high-resolution photogrammetry and multispectral data at the local scale, capturing microerosion features, seedling establishment, and vegetation recovery patterns. This multi-scale approach supports an adaptive management strategy. Decision-makers can optimize the allocation of limited resources by directing naturalistic engineering works, such as fascines and live barriers, to the most erosion-prone slopes, while favoring natural regeneration in more resilient sectors. Ultimately, GIS and remote sensing transform post-fire restoration into a science-driven process, enabling predictive modeling of ecosystem recovery under climate change scenarios and ensuring interventions that are both ecologically effective and economically efficient. Prevention and planning are critical components of post-fire reforestation, as the long-term resilience of reconstructed ecosystems depends not only on species selection but also on the structural configuration of the landscape. Fire prevention does not end with extinguishing flames. It becomes a design principle that must be incorporated into the spatial arrangement of reforested areas. A key strategy lies in the creation of horizontal discontinuities, such as fire breaks, ecological corridors, and managed open spaces, which act as buffers capable of interrupting the continuity of fuel and reducing the probability of large-scale fire spread. Equally important are vertical discontinuities, achieved through the differentiation of plant layers, herbaceous, shrub, and arboreal strata, that reduce the risk of crown fire propagation. These measures are rooted in the principles of landscape ecology, where heterogeneity increases system stability. In Mediterranean ecosystems, where drought, wind, and high fuel loads combine to produce intense fire regimes, such preventive structures transform forests into adaptive landscapes. They do not eliminate fire risk, but they reduce its intensity and spatial extent, ensuring that disturbance remains within the ecological thresholds of recovery. On Vesuvius, for example, the introduction of discontinuities alongside naturalistic engineering has created mosaic-like patterns that act as functional fire buffers. By embedding prevention into design, reforestation shifts from a purely restorative action to a proactive strategy, producing ecosystems that are less vulnerable and more resilient to future disturbances, in line with climate change adaptation goals. The participation of local communities represents one of the most decisive factors in ensuring the long-term success of post-fire reforestation strategies. While engineering solutions and ecological planning provide the technical backbone of restoration, it is the active involvement of people who inhabit and use these landscapes that guarantees the durability and resilience of the interventions. Participatory co-design introduces a crucial dimension. When local stakeholders, farmers, landowners, schools, and civic associations are directly involved in decision-making, the projects gain social legitimacy and are more likely to be maintained over time. Beyond acceptance, community participation stimulates environmental awareness, building a collective understanding of the ecological services provided by restored forests, such as water regulation, carbon sequestration, and soil protection. International case studies, including projects in Spain, Greece, and Italy, show that the integration of educational programs, environmental volunteering, and citizen science initiatives significantly reduces risky behaviors, such as negligence or even intentional arson, by fostering a stronger sense of stewardship. On Mount Vesuvius, for instance, the engagement of local communities in guided reforestation days and monitoring activities has contributed to restoring not just the ecosystem, but also the social-ecological relationship between people and their environment. In this way, community participation becomes more than a supporting element. It is a structural component of resilience, ensuring that reforested landscapes are not only technically restored but also socially embedded and protected from future degradation. Post-fire reforestation must be analyzed not only through an ecological lens but also in terms of its socio-economic returns, which often justify and strengthen investment decisions. By stabilizing burned slopes and re-establishing vegetation cover, reforestation significantly reduces the risk of hydrogeological disasters, lowering public expenditure on emergency interventions, reconstruction of infrastructure, and compensation for losses. This prevention-based approach generates long-term economic savings compared to reactive strategies. In parallel, restored landscapes enhance the appeal of sustainable tourism, particularly in Mediterranean regions where natural beauty and cultural heritage are closely intertwined. Areas such as Mount Vesuvius have demonstrated that environmental recovery can directly support local economies by ensuring safer access to trails, natural parks, and ecotourism activities. The enhancement of ecosystem services, from carbon sequestration to soil fertility and water regulation, translates into measurable benefits for agriculture, climate policy, and regional economies. Here, tools such as cost-benefit analysis, CBA, and environmental accounting methods provide objective quantification, allowing policymakers to demonstrate how each euro invested in ecological restoration yields multiple returns in avoided damages, increased ecosystem productivity, and improved quality of life for local communities. Thus, the socioeconomic evaluation is not a secondary dimension, but rather a strategic pillar that aligns ecological resilience with financial sustainability and community well-being. Restored forests must be considered as true ecological infrastructures, not as the mere sum of planted trees. Their importance lies in the multiple ecosystem services they provide, which connect environmental resilience with human well-being. One of the most relevant services is carbon sequestration, as reforested areas actively contribute to the achievement of international climate mitigation targets by absorbing CO2 and buffering greenhouse gas concentrations. Equally critical is the regulation of the hydrological cycle. By improving water infiltration and reducing surface runoff, restored forests limit soil erosion, recharge aquifers, and mitigate hydrogeological instability, functions particularly essential in fragile Mediterranean landscapes such as the pyroclastic soils of Vesuvius. Furthermore, the return of vegetation initiates a progressive increase in ecological complexity, creating habitats that support diverse flora and fauna. This dynamic enhances biodiversity conservation and restores ecological interactions such as pollination, seed dispersal, and trophic balance. From a policy perspective, the evaluation of ecosystem services allows for the quantification of the real value of restoration interventions, transforming them into measurable contributions to sustainable development strategies. In this sense, reforestation becomes not just an environmental duty but a strategic investment in ecological security, climate stability, and socioeconomic resilience. Ecosystem resilience is a cornerstone of post-fire reforestation strategies, especially in the Mediterranean context, where climatic stressors and recurrent fires impose constant adaptive pressure. Resilience rests on two key pillars: structural diversity and functional diversity. Structural diversity refers to the vertical stratification of plant layers, trees, shrubs, and herbaceous species, as well as the horizontal heterogeneity of patches within the landscape. This mosaic structure interrupts fire continuity and promotes microhabitats that sustain biodiversity. Functional diversity, on the other hand, derives from the coexistence of species with complementary ecological roles, for example, nitrogen-fixing plants improving soil fertility, deep-rooted species stabilizing slopes, and drought-resistant shrubs enhancing resilience to water scarcity. Together, these interactions generate ecological redundancy, ensuring that ecosystem processes, such as nutrient cycling, pollination, and carbon sequestration, are maintained even under stress. Monoculture-based interventions, although sometimes cheaper and faster to implement, have repeatedly shown their fragility. Uniform stands are highly vulnerable to pathogens, pests, and recurrent fires, undermining both ecological and economic sustainability. Conversely, diversified plant communities, carefully selected according to pedoclimatic conditions, not only improve the stability of restored ecosystems but also increase their adaptive capacity in the face of climate change. In this perspective, designing resilient reforestation is not simply about replacing burned biomass, but about constructing a dynamic ecological system, capable of evolving and maintaining its functions despite disturbances. This is the true measure of long-term success in post-fire restoration. Innovative techniques represent a decisive turning point in post-fire reforestation, as they address one of the greatest challenges, ensuring the survival of young plants during the critical early years of establishment. Among these, mycorrhizal inoculation is one of the most effective solutions. By creating symbiotic associations between plant roots and beneficial fungi, mycorrhizae significantly improve water and nutrient uptake, particularly phosphorus and nitrogen, while also increasing resistance to biotic and abiotic stress. This symbiosis accelerates root system development, allowing plants to stabilize soils more effectively and withstand Mediterranean summer droughts. Equally crucial are hydrogels, superabsorbent polymers capable of retaining large quantities of water and gradually releasing it to the roots. In ecosystems like the Vesuvian slopes, where pyroclastic soils drain rapidly, hydrogels act as localized water reservoirs, mitigating the effects of prolonged droughts that often follow fire events. Finally, the application of biodegradable mulches provides multiple ecological benefits. They suppress weed competition, reduce water evaporation from the soil, moderate surface temperatures, and contribute organic matter as they decompose. Together, these measures recreate a more favorable microclimate for plant establishment. When integrated into reforestation protocols, these innovative techniques transform fragile plantations into more resilient systems, drastically improving survival rates and reducing the need for repeated interventions. Their use demonstrates how technological innovation, combined with ecological knowledge, can enhance the efficiency and sustainability of post-fire restoration strategies. Innovative techniques represent a decisive turning point in post-fire reforestation, as they address one of the greatest challenges, ensuring the survival of young plants during the critical early years of establishment. Among these, mycorrhizal inoculation is one of the most effective solutions. By creating symbiotic associations between plant roots and beneficial fungi, mycorrhizae significantly improve water and nutrient uptake, particularly phosphorus and nitrogen, while also increasing resistance to biotic and abiotic stress. This symbiosis accelerates root system development, allowing plants to stabilize soils more effectively and withstand Mediterranean summer droughts. Equally crucial are hydrogels, superabsorbent polymers capable of retaining large quantities of water and gradually releasing it to the roots. In ecosystems like the Vesuvian slopes, where pyroclastic soils drain rapidly, hydrogels act as localized water reservoirs, mitigating the effects of prolonged droughts that often follow fire events. Finally, the application of biodegradable mulches provides multiple ecological benefits. They suppress weed competition, reduce water evaporation from the soil, moderate surface temperatures, and contribute organic matter as they decompose. Together, these measures recreate a more favorable microclimate for plant establishment. When integrated into reforestation protocols, these innovative techniques transform fragile plantations into more resilient systems, drastically improving survival rates and reducing the need for repeated interventions. Their use demonstrates how technological innovation, combined with ecological knowledge, can enhance the efficiency and sustainability of post-fire restoration strategies. The regulatory framework represents the institutional backbone that ensures reforestation actions after a fire are not only technically effective but also ecologically and legally consistent. At the European level, the Habitats Directive, 9243/EC, plays a fundamental role. It requires member states to safeguard natural habitats and species of community interest, ensuring that post-fire interventions contribute to the long-term conservation of biodiversity. This means that any reforestation must not alter the ecological integrity of protected areas, but rather reinforce their resilience. In the Italian context, Law 353/2000, the National Framework Law on Forest Fires, establishes precise rules for the management of burned areas. Among its most important provisions, it prohibits land use changes on fire-damaged sites for a minimum of 15 years, and it imposes severe restrictions on building activities. These constraints are crucial to prevent speculation and to ensure that post-fire interventions maintain a strictly environmental vocation. Moreover, the law requires regional and municipal authorities to prepare and update forest fire plans, integrating prevention, monitoring, and reforestation measures. Together, European directives and national legislation create a multi-level governance system that guides reforestation towards sustainable objectives, soil protection, biodiversity conservation, and climate change mitigation. In this sense, the legal framework is not a bureaucratic obstacle, but rather a strategic tool to guarantee that ecological restoration is scientifically grounded, socially fair, and environmentally durable. Measuring the success of post-fire reforestation projects requires a multidimensional evaluation framework that goes beyond the simple metric of seedling survival. In ecological terms, key indicators include the return of biodiversity, such as the presence of native flora and the recolonization by fauna across multiple trophic levels. Equally important is the measurement of ecosystem resilience, understood as the ability of the reconstituted forest to withstand new disturbances, whether fire, drought, or pest outbreaks. Soil stability is another central parameter, which can be assessed through erosion monitoring, hydrological balance analysis, and the recovery of organic matter. On the economic side, indicators must account for the reduction of hydrogeological damage, for example, decreased costs linked to landslides and flooding in downstream communities. Furthermore, the valuation of ecosystem services, such as carbon sequestration, water cycle regulation, and support for biodiversity, provides a more holistic measure of long-term benefits. Tools like cost-benefit analysis, CBA, and ecosystem service valuation models allow for the integration of ecological and economic data, offering decision-makers a comprehensive view of project performance. This integrated approach ensures that reforestation is not only an exercise in environmental recovery, but also a sustainable investment in ecological infrastructure, with measurable returns in terms of climate mitigation, risk reduction, and societal well-being. Ultimately, success lies in building forests that are ecologically functional, economically viable, and socially beneficial in the long term. Post-fire reforestation in the Mediterranean context faces structural and recurring challenges that must be addressed with rigor and innovation. One of the most critical is the high mortality rate of seedlings during the first 3 years after planting, largely due to summer droughts, competition with invasive species, and poor soil conditions following fire-induced degradation. This fragility often reduces the effectiveness of reforestation efforts if not coupled with soil management practices such as mulching, irrigation support, or the use of mycorrhizal inoculants. A second issue is the constant risk of recurrent fires, which may destroy young reconstituted forests before they achieve ecological maturity. This creates a vicious cycle of disturbance and degradation that undermines long-term resilience. Fire-smart design, such as the strategic insertion of fire breaks, ecological corridors, and species with high resprouting ability, becomes essential to reduce vulnerability. Finally, the scarcity of water resources in an increasingly arid Mediterranean climate represents a decisive limiting factor. The intensification of heat waves and prolonged drought periods requires the adoption of adaptive strategies, including drought-tolerant species selection, hydrogel-based water retention, and precision irrigation systems in pilot plots. The convergence of these issues highlights the need for an adaptive management approach, where interventions are continuously monitored, evaluated, and corrected through the integration of field data, remote sensing, and predictive ecological models. In this way, reforestation evolves from a static restoration practice into a dynamic process, capable of responding to both immediate ecological pressures and long-term climate uncertainties. Research and innovation represent the cornerstone of effective post-fire reforestation strategies, particularly in Mediterranean ecosystems under increasing climatic stress. Collaboration with universities and research centers allows the continuous experimentation of forest bioengineering techniques, such as live crib walls, fascines, and vegetated geogrids, which not only stabilize soils but also accelerate natural regeneration by integrating living organisms into engineering solutions. Equally important is the deployment of environmental sensors capable of monitoring microclimatic parameters, soil moisture, and vegetation stress in real time. These data streams feed into predictive algorithms, often supported by artificial intelligence, which model the probability of seedling mortality, the spread of pests, or the evolution of fire risk under different climate scenarios. This integration of field experimentation and digital technologies transforms each reforestation area into a living laboratory, where ecological responses can be observed, tested, and adapted dynamically. Moreover, the ability to select species more resilient to climate change, for example, Mediterranean oaks with higher drought tolerance or shrub species with strong resprouting capacity, ensures that the restored forests are not only functional in the short term but also capable of adapting to future disturbances. By adopting this scientific and adaptive approach, reforestation shifts from a reactive emergency measure to a proactive, knowledge-driven process, capable of generating both ecological resilience and transferable best practices at national and international scales. International cooperation in post-fire reforestation is not simply desirable, but structurally essential within the Mediterranean basin. The ecological and climatic similarities of this region, characterized by prolonged summer droughts, recurrent heat waves, and fragile ecosystems, create a shared vulnerability that requires collective strategies. By fostering collaboration between countries such as Italy, Spain, Greece, and Portugal, it becomes possible to exchange best practices in naturalistic engineering, such as the use of livewood weirs, fascines, and soil bioengineering systems, which have proven effective in reducing erosion and stabilizing steep slopes after fire events. Equally important is the technological dimension of cooperation. The integration of advanced monitoring systems, including satellite constellations like Sentinel-2 and AI-based predictive algorithms, provides a common platform for evaluating fire severity, planning reforestation, and tracking ecological recovery. International networks and joint research programs make it possible to establish methodological standards, ensuring that restoration actions are comparable, measurable, and scalable across different contexts. Ultimately, this shared approach strengthens the collective response capacity of Mediterranean countries, while also projecting these experiences onto the global stage as a model of climate adaptation and ecological. Environmental education represents a strategic complement to post-fire reforestation. Restoring a forest is not limited to soil stabilization or vegetation recovery. It is equally about building a culture of responsibility around ecosystems. The involvement of schools, local communities, and volunteer associations in caring for newly reforested areas creates a direct connection between citizens and the territory. This engagement strengthens ecological awareness and fosters a sense of stewardship, where individuals see themselves as active custodians of environmental heritage rather than passive observers. From a scientific perspective, this social dimension has a measurable impact on fire prevention strategies. Areas where environmental education programs have been implemented show lower rates of arson and negligent behavior, since communities become more aware of the ecological and economic costs of forest loss. Moreover, participatory projects provide additional human resources for monitoring, reporting of risk situations, and even supporting naturalistic engineering interventions. Thus, environmental education acts as an indirect but powerful form of prevention, complementing technological and ecological measures with a socio-cultural layer of resilience. By integrating education into reforestation programs, the probability of long-term success increases, transforming ecological restoration into a shared civic responsibility. Long-term monitoring is the cornerstone of post-fire reforestation success, since forest ecosystems require 20 to 30 years to fully recover their ecological functionality. Unlike short-term interventions, which measure only survival rates in the first years, continuous observation allows us to assess the progressive reactivation of ecosystem processes, such as nutrient cycling, biodiversity recovery, and hydrological regulation. Modern strategies combine periodic field surveys to evaluate vegetation growth, soil quality, and fauna recolonization, with satellite remote sensing, particularly from platforms such as Sentinel-2 and Landsat, which provide high-resolution data on vegetation indices and fire scar evolution. In addition, predictive ecological models are used to forecast risks, such as new fire outbreaks, pest invasions, or erosion dynamics, enabling adaptive adjustments to management strategies. This integrated monitoring framework is not static but adaptive, meaning it provides feedback loops that allow managers to intervene promptly when critical issues emerge. In the case of Vesuvius, for example, the integration of drones, geomatic surveys, and ecological indicators has made it possible to measure the effectiveness of naturalistic engineering interventions and to verify the resilience of spontaneous regeneration processes. Ultimately, long-term monitoring ensures that reforestation does not stop at tree establishment, but evolves into a sustainable trajectory of ecological restoration, capable of ensuring resilience under the pressures of climate change. Restored forests play a dual role in the fight against climate change. They act as carbon sinks and as regulators of the local microclimate. Through CO2 sequestration, reforested areas offset part of the anthropogenic emissions, contributing directly to global mitigation strategies aligned with the Paris Agreement. At the same time, the increase in canopy cover enhances shading and evapotranspiration, processes that reduce local air temperature and increase relative humidity, thereby limiting the formation of urban and peri-urban heat islands. The effectiveness of these functions can be quantified through climate indicators. The carbon balance measures the net difference between captured and emitted carbon, while continuous monitoring of temperature and humidity variations highlights the microclimatic benefits generated by forest restoration. For example, on volcanic soils such as those of Vesuvius, reforestation not only stabilized pyroclastic slopes but also produced measurable reductions in soil surface temperature, improving both ecological resilience and human well-being in surrounding communities. By integrating these indicators with remote sensing technologies and field-based microclimate stations, managers gain objective metrics to assess the ecological effectiveness of reforestation over time. This transforms forest restoration from a symbolic action into a scientifically demonstrable contribution to climate adaptation and mitigation. The integration of the space economy into post-fire reforestation strategies marks a turning point in environmental management. By leveraging the combined power of satellite constellations, artificial intelligence, and big data analytics, it becomes possible to move from reactive interventions to proactive, predictive strategies. Satellites such as those of the Copernicus program and the Future I-READ constellation provide high-frequency, high-resolution imagery that enables continuous monitoring of burned areas and the subsequent regeneration processes. Through predictive fire risk models, satellite data help identify areas most vulnerable to future ignitions, while AI-driven algorithms detect early vegetation stress, allowing timely interventions. Furthermore, the monitoring of plant regeneration via spectral indices, such as NDVI and NBR, provides objective evidence of the effectiveness of reforestation and natural regeneration. At the same time, resource optimization becomes possible. Satellite-derived data can guide the targeted use of water, soil stabilizers, and reforestation efforts, reducing costs and environmental impacts. Projects like I-READ, with its constellation of constellations, extend these capabilities to a national and Mediterranean scale, offering unprecedented opportunities for integrated ecosystem management. The synergy between ecological restoration and space technologies thus creates a new paradigm, where forest resilience is strengthened not only on the ground but also from space, ensuring long-term sustainability. The future perspectives of post-fire reforestation point towards an innovative integration with the principles of the circular bioeconomy. In this paradigm, forests are no longer considered solely as ecosystems to be restored, but also as renewable resources capable of supporting sustainable value chains. Restored forests provide biomass, non-timber forest products, and ecosystem services that can be economically valorized without compromising ecological integrity. This integration ensures that environmental protection and economic development proceed in parallel. For example, the use of residues from silvicultural operations can feed local bioenergy systems, while cork, resins, or medicinal plants can create green markets linked to biodiversity conservation. At the same time, the implementation of circular principles minimizes waste and closes nutrient cycles, reinforcing soil fertility and resilience. By aligning reforestation with the European Green Deal and global decarbonization strategies, this approach makes forests not only a defensive barrier against hydrogeological and climatic risks, but also a driving force for territorial innovation. In the Mediterranean context, where rural depopulation and land abandonment are pressing issues, reforested areas can become engines of green employment and sustainable tourism. Ultimately, the synergy between reforestation and bioeconomy represents the next frontier, forests as ecological infrastructures that provide resilience, but also as active players in the transition towards a low-carbon and sustainable society. Post-fire reforestation must be understood as a multidisciplinary and strategic process, rather than a mere forestry intervention. Its success depends on the integration of ecological sciences, engineering, climatology, and social participation, making it an essential component of territorial governance in the Mediterranean. The case of Vesuvius provides a clear demonstration of this integrated vision. After the devastating fires of 2017, the combination of naturalistic engineering works, such as Fascinate, livewood weirs, and transversal barriers, the promotion of spontaneous natural regeneration of native species, and the use of scientific monitoring tools created a model of resilience that has prevented soil loss, supported biodiversity recovery, and reduced hydrogeological risk. This approach goes beyond environmental protection. It restores ecosystem services fundamental to human well-being, such as water regulation, climate mitigation, and cultural values tied to landscapes. At the same time, it strengthens community security and socioeconomic stability by reducing disaster risks and creating opportunities for sustainable local development. The Vesuvius experience demonstrates that when science, institutions, and society converge, reforestation becomes not only a tool for ecological restoration, but also a model of international best practice. Its value lies in showing that resilience is not improvised, but built through knowledge, planning, and adaptive management, principles that must guide Mediterranean and global strategies in the face of climate change and increasing fire regimes. The future of Mediterranean forest management is built upon a principle of synergy, the convergence of scientific research, institutional governance, and the active involvement of local communities. In a context where climate change amplifies fire frequency and intensity, no single actor can provide adequate solutions. Only through collaborative approaches can we design strategies that are resilient, adaptive, and sustainable. Science contributes by offering data, models, and innovative tools, from geomatic surveys to artificial intelligence and satellite-based monitoring, essential for anticipating risks and guiding interventions. Institutions, such as the Carabinieri Forestali and local administrations, ensure the implementation of policies, legal frameworks, and operational responses that protect landscapes and populations. Communities, on the other hand, represent the living interface with the territory, translating prevention and restoration strategies into everyday practice, from stewardship of reforested areas to awareness and education campaigns. By integrating these three pillars, Mediterranean forests can evolve into resilient ecological infrastructures, capable of maintaining ecosystem services, carbon sequestration, water regulation, and biodiversity conservation, while also safeguarding human safety and cultural landscapes. The acknowledgements thus extend to all those who contribute, scientists, policymakers, forest officers, and citizens, because resilience is not the achievement of a single sector but the outcome of shared responsibility. Opening the floor to discussion is not just a formal closure, but an invitation to co-design the future, ensuring that the Mediterranean becomes not only a region of vulnerability, but also a global model of sustainable forest management.